The fluorescent lights of the Eastgate Middle School gymnasium buzzed overhead, a dull, insistent hum that mirrored the apathy permeating the Friday morning assembly. Rows of folding chairs stretched out across the polished floor, mostly empty, occupied by a scattering of students who wore the universal expression of adolescent boredom. Slumped shoulders, glazed eyes, a pervasive air of waiting for it all to be over. Janelle Rucker, tucked away in the back row, felt a strange sense of relief at the sparse attendance. It was her first week at Eastgate, and anonymity was her most cherished possession. Each unfamiliar face, each potential interaction, felt like a stone dropped into the still pond of her carefully constructed solitude, sending ripples of anxiety through her. She preferred the quiet corners, the spaces between the notes, the refuge of her own thoughts. The air hung thick with the smell of stale popcorn and disinfectant, a peculiar combination that made her stomach churn slightly. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the plastic creaking beneath her. The principal, a man whose name she'd already forgotten, was droning on about school spirit and upcoming events. His voice, amplified by the crackling microphone, bounced off the walls, a monotonous wave washing over the indifferent audience. Janelle watched him, a detached observer. He was a caricature of enthusiastic authority, his gestures too broad, his smile too wide, his words too loud. He reminded her of a brightly colored balloon, inflated with forced cheer, just waiting for a pinprick to deflate him. Now, Principal Lell boomed, his voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the gymnasium. He clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and sudden, making Janelle flinch. Let's try to inject a little enthusiasm into this Friday, shall we? He scanned the sparse crowd, his gaze settling on Janelle. A knot of unease tightened in her chest. She wished she could disappear, melt into the shadows at the edge of the room. Why did he have to look at her? Why did she always feel like a spotlight was searching her out, even in the dimmest of corners? He chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves, and pointed in her direction. Well, he said, his voice laced with a false joviality that made Janelle's skin crawl. Maybe our new student here can play us a little something, you know, jazz it up a bit. A ripple of laughter, awkward and uncomfortable, spread through the room. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Her face flushed hot, the heat spreading down her neck and into her chest. Jazz it up? Did he really just say that? The casual cruelty of his words, the underlying stereotype, struck her with the force of a physical blow. For a moment the world tilted on its axis. The buzzing of the lights intensified, the stale air choked her. The laughter became a cacophony of mocking voices. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating weight of all those eyes on her. But then, something shifted within her. The initial wave of humiliation receded, replaced by a strange calm. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing a torrent of emotions that had been held back for far too long. She thought of her grandmother, her gentle hands on the piano keys, the melodies that had filled their small apartment with warmth and love. She thought of the silence that had descended after her grandmother's passing, a silence that no amount of spoken words could fill. She thought of the music that had become her refuge, her voice in a world that seemed determined to silence her. Without hesitation, she stood. Her legs felt strangely steady beneath her, despite the tremor that ran through her body. She walked towards the stage, her steps measured, her gaze fixed on the gleaming black surface of the grand piano that sat in the center. The laughter faded, replaced by a stunned silence. Principal Lell's face, frozen in a mask of surprised amusement, blurred in her peripheral vision. She didn't see the curious stares, the whispered comments, the perplexed expressions. She saw only the piano, a familiar friend waiting to embrace her. As she reached the stage, she paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the keys. The silence in the gymnasium was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the lights and the drumming of her own heart. It was a silence pregnant with expectation, a silence that demanded to be filled. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. And then her fingers touched the keys. The first notes resonated through the room, clear and pure, cutting through the stagnant air like a shard of glass. It wasn't jazz. It wasn't the upbeat, cheerful tune that Principal Lel had expected. It was a lament, a cry of grief, a story whispered in the language of music. The melody unfolded, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and resilience, of loss and hope. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a spirit soaring, of a young girl finding her voice in the silence. Janelle lost herself in the music, her fingers dancing over the keys, her body swaying with the rhythm. The gymnasium, the principal, the curious stares, all faded away. She was alone with her grief, her memories, her music. It was a sanctuary, a space where words were unnecessary, where emotions flowed freely, where the silence spoke volumes. And as the final notes echoed through the room, a profound silence descended, a silence far different from the apathy that had permeated the assembly just moments before. This was the silence of understanding, of empathy, of shared humanity. The squeak of sneakers on polished wood echoed unervingly in Janelle's ears, each footfall a small, amplified explosion in the suffocating silence. She could feel the weight of 1,000 gazes, pressing down on her like a physical burden. The air, thick with the combined scent of floor wax and adolescent anticipation, felt heavy in her lungs. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered above the cool ivory keys of the grand piano. Just breathe, Janelle. She repeated the mantra silently, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The stage lights, harsh and unforgiving, seemed to dissect every flaw, every imperfection. She could see Principal Lel standing awkwardly off to the side, a strained smile plastered on his face. The smile didn't reach his eyes. He's just waiting for this to be over, Janelle thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Waiting for the awkward moment to pass so he can get back to his carefully constructed image of amiable authority. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sea of faces, the expectant hush, the weight of the principal's blunder hanging in the air like a bad joke. Behind her eyelids, another face materialized. A face framed by dark curls, a face that held a mischievous glint in its eyes. Sarah. The memory, sharp and clear as broken glass, pierced through the fog of anxiety. Sarah, her cousin, her confidant, her partner in crime. Gone. A lump formed in her throat, threatening to choke her. Her fingers found the opening chords. A simple melody, tentative at first, then gaining strength, rising like a whisper in the vast emptiness of the gymnasium. The notes resonated, not just from the strings of the piano, but from the deepest recesses of her being. Each chord was a memory, each phrase a fragment of a life stolen too soon. The music became a vessel, carrying the weight of her grief, her anger, her confusion. She didn't look up. She couldn't. The vulnerability was too raw, too exposed. She poured everything into the music, the stolen laughter echoing in empty hallways, the shared secrets whispered under the covers of a childhood bed, the crushing weight of absence that had become her constant companion. The melody shifted, becoming more complex, more insistent. A dissonant chord echoed the chaotic turmoil within her. The music spoke a language that words couldn't capture, a language of raw emotion, of unspoken pain, of the aching emptiness that had become her new reality. Her fingers danced over the keys, driven by a force beyond her conscious control. The music was a torrent, a storm raging within the confines of her soul. A hush fell over the assembly. The whispers and fidgeting ceased. The initial discomfort, the awkward tension that had permeated the air after Principal Lel's ill-conceived joke, began to dissipate, replaced by something else entirely. A pin could have dropped, and the sound would have reverberated through the stunned silence. Even Principal Lel seemed to have forgotten his carefully crafted persona, his face now a mask of bewildered fascination. Janelle felt a tear escape, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She hadn't meant to cry. She had wanted to remain detached, to hide behind the wall of music she had built around herself. But the music, her sanctuary, had also become her betrayer, exposing the raw wounds she had so carefully concealed. A whispered voice broke the silence, cutting through the thick atmosphere. Wait, is she making that up? The question, laced with disbelief, hung in the air for a moment, unanswered. Another whisper, softer this time, closer to Janelle, reached her ears. Yo, is she crying? The questions, though whispered, seemed to reverberate through the silence. Janelle's fingers faltered for a split second, but the music pressed on, relentless, driven by its own internal momentum. They don't understand. The thought surfaced, a bitter wave of despair washing over her. They think it's a performance, a show. But it wasn't a performance. It was her life, laid bare, dissected note by note. It was the truth she couldn't speak, the pain she couldn't articulate. The music reached its crescendo, a powerful surge of emotion that filled the gymnasium. Then, just as suddenly, it subsided, the final notes fading into the stunned silence. Janelle's hands rested on the keys, trembling slightly. She remained seated, head bowed, unable to face the sea of faces that were now turned towards her, no longer with amusement or indifference, but with a mixture of awe, confusion, and something akin to understanding. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the quiet sound of her own ragged breathing. The air, once charged with awkward tension, now felt different. It was filled with a raw, palpable emotion that hung heavy in the space between them. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The discomfort had been replaced by something else, something deeper, something that resonated with the raw honesty of the music. Respect, empathy. The seeds of understanding had been sown, planted in the fertile ground of shared human experience. The music had spoken where words had failed, bridging the chasm of misunderstanding with the universal language of grief. The final note faded, swallowed by the cavernous silence of the gymnasium. It hung there, a fragile ghost of sound, vibrating in the dust motes dancing in the angled beams of morning sun. Janelle sat frozen, her fingers still hovering above the ivory keys, as though waiting for an echo that wouldn't come. Her breath hitched, shallow and quick, mirroring the frantic flutter of a trapped bird against her ribs. The weight of the silence pressed down, heavier than the hushed expectancy that had preceded her performance. This was different. This wasn't the anticipatory silence of a crowd waiting to be entertained. It was the stunned, disbelieving silence of a room full of people who had inadvertently witnessed something deeply personal, something raw and exposed. The coldness of the keys seeped into her fingertips, a stark contrast to the feverish heat that had bloomed in her cheeks during the performance. She had poured everything into those notes, the grief that clawed at her throat, the anger that simmered beneath the surface, the bone-deep loneliness that had become her unwelcome companion. It was a melody born of pain, a lament whispered in the language of her soul. Now, in the echoing quiet, she felt stripped bare, vulnerable. Had she made a mistake? Had she revealed too much? The thought prickled at the edges of her awareness, a ripple of unease in the vast pool of her exhaustion. A warm hand settled gently on her shoulder, a feather-light touch that startled her. She turned slightly, her gaze meeting Ms. Green's kind eyes. The music teacher's face was etched with a mixture of concern and something else, admiration, understanding. Janelle couldn't decipher it, but the warmth in her gaze was a lifeline in the oppressive silence. Ms. Green offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the emotional storm that had just raged across the gymnasium. It was enough. A tiny spark of warmth ignited in Janelle's chest, pushing back against the encroaching chill of her anxiety. Across the room, Principal Lell stood motionless, his face drained of its usual jovial color. The forced smile he had worn moments before had vanished, replaced by an expression Janelle couldn't quite interpret. Was it regret, disbelief, or perhaps a flicker of something akin to shame? He seemed smaller somehow, his usual boisterous energy extinguished by the weight of the silence. Janelle could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the frantic whirring of a man struggling to reconcile the girl on the stage with the stereotypical image he had projected onto her just moments before. The thought brought a bitter taste to her mouth, a residue of the humiliation she had felt. but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of something else. Exhaustion, emptiness. The emotional outpouring had left her drained, hollowed out. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, threatening to crack under its own weight. Seconds ticked by, each one a small eternity in the suspended reality of the gymnasium. Janelle could feel the stares, hundreds of eyes boring into her back, a tangible weight that made her skin crawl. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the polished wooden floor and seep into the cracks between the floorboards. Anywhere but here, under the scrutiny of these silent witnesses. She closed her eyes, willing herself to become invisible, to erase the memory of the last few minutes. Then, a single clap broke the silence. Hesitant, tentative like a bird testing its wings. It was followed by another, and then another, slowly gaining momentum, building into a wave of applause. The sound washed over Janelle, a tidal surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause that followed a typical school assembly performance. This was different. This was an acknowledgement, a validation of the raw emotion she had poured into her music. It was an apology, a silent plea for forgiveness. A lump formed in Janelle's throat, thick and heavy. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let them fall. She had shown them her vulnerability, her pain. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not now. Not after she had finally found her voice. The applause continued, swelling to fill the gymnasium, a resounding echo of the emotions that had reverberated through the room just moments before. Janelle sat still, absorbing the sound, letting it wash over her like a cleansing rain. The weight on her chest began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of peace. She had spoken her truth, and they had heard her. It wasn't the victory she had imagined, but it was a victory nonetheless. In the heart of her silence, she had found her voice, and in their stunned silence, they had finally learned to listen. The last note hung in the air, a fragile echo in the stunned silence of the auditorium. Janelle's fingers rested on the keys, the ivory cool against her burning skin. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for release. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing down on her like a physical weight. They don't understand, she thought, a familiar ache blossoming in her chest. They'll never understand. She hadn't played for them, not really. She had played for the ghost in the empty chair beside her grandmother's piano, for the unspoken words that choked her throat, for the melody that haunted her dreams. Then, a single hesitant clap broke the spell. Another followed, then another, until the auditorium erupted in a wave of applause, a cacophony that clashed with the quiet sorrow still swirling within her. She hadn't anticipated this. She'd expected ridicule, whispers, the sting of their laughter. This was different. A confusing mix of relief and unease washed over her as she rose from the bench, her legs trembling slightly. She kept her gaze fixed on the exit, a beacon in the swirling chaos of the auditorium. The weekend was a blur. The quiet solitude of her room became her sanctuary, the only place where the echoes of the assembly didn't follow her. She hadn't turned on her phone, hadn't checked her messages. The thought of facing the outside world, of confronting the aftermath of her impulsive act, was overwhelming. She practiced her scales, the familiar patterns a soothing balm against the raw edges of her emotions. Each note was a whisper, a secret language spoken only between her and the ghost of her grief. But the world outside her room had a way of intruding, even on her carefully constructed peace. On Sunday evening, her mother, her face etched with a mixture of worry and bewilderment, showed her a video on her phone. It was a shaky recording of her performance, taken from the back of the auditorium. Beneath it, a caption, "Brave young girl silences school with powerful piano piece after insensitive joke." The number of views was staggering. Janelle felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was more than she had bargained for. This was exposure, the kind she had spent the last 2 years meticulously avoiding. By Monday morning, the video had gone viral. The comments section was a battlefield of conflicting opinions. Some praised her courage and talent, their words a soothing balm against the lingering sting of Friday's humiliation. Others criticized her, accusing her of being manipulative, of seeking attention. Eastgate Strong. One hashtag read, defending the principal and the school. Another, Stand with Janelle, championed her vulnerability and called for accountability. News outlets picked up the story, each one adding their own spin, their own interpretation of events. Teens' piano protest goes viral, one headline screamed. Another, more cautious, read, Eastgate Middle School faces backlash after assembly incident. Janelle felt like a specimen under a microscope, every aspect of her life dissected and analyzed by strangers. The quiet anonymity she had craved was shattered. She walked through the school hallways on Monday morning, the air thick with whispers and sideways glances. Some students offered shy smiles of support. Others stared with open hostility. She felt their gazes like physical touches, branding her skin with their judgment. Principal Lel, she noticed, avoided her. He seemed smaller somehow, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a quiet unease. She saw him huddled in whispered conversations with other teachers, his face pale and drawn. He didn't meet her eyes. He's afraid, she realized, a flicker of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but perhaps a cold acknowledgement of the power she now held, passing through her. It was a power she hadn't sought, a power she didn't want. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each one a reminder of the storm she had unleashed. Her mother had fielded calls, from reporters, from concerned parents, even from lawyers offering their services. The quiet life they had built in this new town, the fragile peace they had clung to, was crumbling around them. Janelle retreated to the music room, the familiar scent of wood polish and old sheet music, a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of her world. Ms. Green found her there, sitting at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys but not playing. Janelle, Ms. Green said softly, her voice a gentle counterpoint to the noise in Janelle's head. You okay? Janelle shook her head, the word no catching in her throat. Ms. Green sat beside her, a quiet presence that didn't demand answers. The silence stretched between them, not heavy this time, but filled with an unspoken understanding. She sees me, Janelle thought, a glimmer of warmth in the coldness that had settled around her heart. She sees past the noise, past the labels. And in that moment, amidst the storm of public opinion and the weight of her own grief, Janelle found a fragile thread of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. The music, her sanctuary, her refuge, had become a bridge, connecting her to a world she hadn't known existed, a world where her pain could be understood, where her silence could be heard. The hushed auditorium of Eastgate Middle School held a different weight this Wednesday morning. The air, thick with the faint scent of floor wax and the metallic tang of lingering anxiety, hummed with a low, anticipatory buzz. Sunlight, fragmented by the tall, arched windows, painted stripes across the polished wooden floor, a stark contrast to the shadowed corners where students huddled, their whispers barely audible above the rhythmic tick of the large clock above the stage. Janelle sat near the back, tucked into a corner seat, her presence a carefully constructed shield of invisibility. The worn, smooth wood of the seat beneath her offered little comfort. Each breath felt shallow, a tight knot cinching her chest. Friday's assembly, the echoing laughter, the principal's misguided attempt at humor, the raw exposure of her grief, it all pressed down on her, a suffocating weight. She clutched her worn copy of Chopin's Nocturnes, the embossed cover a familiar comfort against her trembling fingers. The book, a gift from her grandmother, was more than just sheet music. It was a tangible link to a past that felt both precious and unbearably painful. The melody of Nocturne No. 20, the piece she'd played, echoed in the silent chambers of her mind, a melancholic counterpoint to the anxious murmurings around her. She hadn't planned to play. The music had simply erupted, a torrent of emotion unleashed in the face of public humiliation. The act itself, so impulsive, so raw, still felt surreal. The aftermath, the hushed whispers, the curious glances, the unexpected kindness of Ms. Green, it was all a blurry kaleidoscope of impressions. swirling in her mind like dust motes in a sunbeam. She'd avoided eye contact, avoided conversation, retreated into the sanctuary of her music, the only place where she felt truly safe. Now, sitting in this auditorium, waiting, she felt a strange mixture of dread and a flicker of something akin to hope. The word felt foreign, almost dangerous. Hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed. A shift in the atmosphere rippled through the auditorium. The whispers quieted. Necks craned. Principal Lel walked onto the stage, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a quiet solemnity. He stood at the podium, his hands clasped tightly, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of clothes and the almost imperceptible creak of the stage floorboards. Janelle watched him, her heart a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. Could an apology truly bridge the chasm of hurt? Could words erase the sting of public ridicule, the rawness of exposed vulnerability? She doubted it. Yet, a part of her, a small, hesitant part, yearned to believe it was possible. Students, faculty, staff. Principal Lel began, his voice unusually subdued. The microphone amplified the slight tremor in his tone, broadcasting it throughout the silent hall. Janelle noticed the way he cleared his throat, the way his gaze darted across the assembled faces, as if searching for something, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps understanding. "I stand before you today with a heavy heart," he continued, his words echoing in the quiet space. "On Friday, during our assembly, I made a grave error in judgment. My attempt at humor was not only insensitive but deeply offensive, particularly to one of our newest students, Janelle Rucker." He paused, the silence amplifying the weight of his words. Janelle's breath hitched. Hearing her name spoken aloud, in this context, sent a shiver down her spine. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the worn cover of her music book, the familiar texture grounding her in the swirling sea of emotions. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, a palpable pressure that made her skin prickle. Principal Lel continued, his voice gaining a measure of firmness. "I want to apologize, sincerely and unequivocally, to Janelle. My words were thoughtless, disrespectful, and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. I take full responsibility for my actions and the pain they caused." He turned slightly, his gaze seeming to settle on the area where Janelle sat, though his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Janelle," he said, his voice softening, "I am truly sorry. I hope that in time you can forgive me." He then addressed the entire student body, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "This incident serves as a stark reminder of the importance of empathy, respect, and cultural sensitivity. We must all strive to create a school environment where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected, regardless of their background or experiences." He paused again, his gaze sweeping across the auditorium. "I am committed to learning from this mistake and working with all of you to foster a more inclusive and understanding community here at Eastgate." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. The auditorium remained silent for a long moment, the silence a stark contrast to the raucous laughter that had filled the space just days before. Janelle sat still, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief warred with lingering hurt, disbelief mingled with a cautious flicker of hope. Could this be a turning point? Could this apology, so public, so unexpected, truly begin to heal the wounds that had been inflicted? She didn't know. But in the quiet solemnity of the auditorium, in the shared silence that followed Principal Lel's words, she felt a shift, a subtle but perceptible change in the atmosphere. Perhaps, just perhaps, something had begun to mend. The music within her, always present, always a solace, began to soften, the melancholic strains giving way to a tentative, hesitant melody of hope. It was a fragile melody, easily broken, but for the first time in a long time, Janelle felt a glimmer of warmth amidst the lingering shadows of her grief. The lingering scent of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the nervous energy still buzzing in the Eastgate Middle School auditorium. The rows of plastic chairs, normally a sea of fidgeting limbs and whispered conversations, felt oddly still, each student seemingly anchored by the weight of the past week. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, painting dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, restless spirits. Janelle sat near the back, fingers tracing the worn fabric of her backpack strap. The principal's apology, delivered with a trembling voice just moments ago, echoed in the sudden quiet. Public apology. For her. The thought still felt surreal. A strange melody played on an out-of-tune piano. She'd expected whispers, maybe even a few snickers in the hallways. Not this. This heavy, expectant silence. Had she broken something? Or perhaps, just perhaps, she had inadvertently fixed something else. Principal Lel cleared his throat, his amplified voice crackling through the speakers. He spoke of reflection, of understanding, and of the need to celebrate diversity. He spoke of Janelle's courage. The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Courage. Janelle shifted uncomfortably, the label chafing against her raw emotions. She hadn't thought of it as courage, just survival, a desperate, instinctive act of self-preservation. Inside, a quiet voice whispered, "He doesn't understand." None of them do. But then, a new voice, hesitant and fragile, countered, maybe some of them are trying to. Principal Lel's voice shifted, taking on a brighter, almost enthusiastic tone. He announced a new initiative, a student-led music program designed to showcase the diverse talents within the school. He spoke of open mics, collaborative projects, and a school-wide composition competition. A ripple of excited murmurs finally broke the silence. Janelle felt a strange pang in her chest, a mixture of apprehension and a flicker of something akin to hope. Music, the language she spoke fluently when words failed, the refuge she sought when the world became too loud. Could she share that refuge? Could she open that door even a crack to let others in? Later, outside the school gates, amidst the throng of chattering students, Janelle spotted her mother's familiar car. Angela Rucker leaned against the passenger door, a patient, almost anxious smile on her face. As Janelle approached, the smile widened, genuine relief flooding her features. "Janelle," she breathed, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. The embrace, warm and familiar, offered a sense of grounding in the swirling chaos of the day. "I saw it all online. The video, the apology, your music." Angela pulled back slightly, searching Janelle's face. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Janelle hesitated, unsure how to articulate the complex tapestry of emotions swirling within her. "Strange," she finally murmured, her gaze fixed on a chipped patch of paint on the school wall. Empty, but also lighter somehow. Angela's hand rested gently on Janelle's shoulder. "It's okay to feel all those things," she said softly. "It was a lot to go through. But you were amazing, Janelle. Truly amazing." Janelle shrugged, the praise feeling both comforting and unsettling. I just played. It was just music." The words felt inadequate, hollow. How could she explain the torrent of grief, the years of silent screaming that poured out through her fingertips onto the ivory keys? Her mother's silence wasn't judgmental, but understanding. A silence that spoke volumes. Angela had always possessed an uncanny ability to decipher Janelle's unspoken words, to hear the melodies hidden beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor. The years following her father's death had created an invisible language between them, woven from shared sorrow and unspoken comfort. "Sometimes," Angela said quietly, her voice laced with a gentle sadness, "music is more than just notes. It's a bridge, a way to connect with the things we can't say. A way to connect with him." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the cloudy sky. "He would have been so proud of you, Janelle." The mention of her father brought a familiar ache to Janelle's chest. A phantom echo of his laughter, the scent of his pipe tobacco, the warmth of his hand in hers. Lost fragments of a life shattered too soon. "I miss him, Mom," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Angela's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart. I miss him too." She paused, then continued, her voice regaining its strength. "But he lives on in you, Janelle. In your music, in your strength, in your kindness." She tilted Janelle's chin up, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Don't let anyone dim your light, sweetheart. It's too precious." Janelle nodded, the tightness in her chest easing slightly. Her mother's words, like a soothing balm, began to mend the raw edges of her emotions. The fear, the anger, the grief, they were still there, lurking beneath the surface. But now, a flicker of something else began to emerge. A fragile seed of hope, planted in the fertile ground of shared pain and unexpected understanding. The new music program, the tentative smiles in the hallways, the weight of the principal's apology, they were all notes in a new melody, a melody of healing and change, a melody that, just perhaps, she could learn to play. The air in the Eastgate Middle School auditorium hung thick with anticipation, a stark contrast to the usual hum of bored chatter that permeated school board meetings. 2 weeks had crawled by since the assembly, 2 weeks that had felt like an eternity etched in the slow drip of whispers and sideways glances. 2 weeks since the echo of her name, twisted into a mockery, had reverberated through this very space. Janelle adjusted the piano stool. The smooth would cool beneath her fingertips. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the measured tick of the clock on the back wall. She hadn't intended to return, to stand on this stage again, a stage that held the phantom weight of humiliation. Yet, here she was, her fingers hovering over the ivory keys, ready to weave a new narrative. The room was packed, a sea of faces blurring in the periphery of her vision. She could feel their gazes, heavy with expectation, curiosity, perhaps even a flicker of guilt. She recognized Ms. Green, a small beacon of encouragement in the third row, her smile a silent affirmation. Even Principal Lell was present, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a quiet solemnity she hadn't seen before. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the weight of what had transpired and the uncertainty of what was to come. Janelle inhaled deeply, the faint scent of dust and old paper filling her lungs. This wasn't about them, she reminded herself. It wasn't about the stares, the whispers, or the judgment. It was about the melody swirling within her, a melody born from the ashes of pain, a melody that demanded to be heard. She closed her eyes, shutting out the world, and let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes resonated through the room, tentative yet resolute, like a hesitant whisper in the stillness. It was a new composition, unlike anything she'd played before. This wasn't the practiced perfection of Chopin or the comforting familiarity of Debussy. This was raw, untamed, a reflection of the storm that had raged within her for so long. The melody unfolded, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and resilience, of vulnerability and strength. Each note was a breath, a heartbeat, a fragment of the story she couldn't articulate with words. As the music swelled, Janelle lost herself in the current, the world outside fading into a hazy backdrop. She wasn't performing. She was conversing, pouring out the unspoken emotions that had choked her voice for so long. The melody spoke of loss, of the gaping hole left by her mother's absence, a void that echoed in the quiet corners of her heart. It spoke of the struggle to find her footing in a world that seemed determined to define her by her difference, by the color of her skin, by the stereotypes that boxed her in. But it also spoke of hope, of the flickering embers of resilience that refused to be extinguished. When the final note faded, a profound silence settled over the room. Janelle opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden influx of light. The faces that met her gaze were no longer blurred but etched with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Some eyes glistened with unshed tears, others were wide with a newfound understanding. The silence stretched, heavy and pregnant with meaning, until it was broken by a single hesitant clap. Then another and another, until the room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over her, a tangible expression of something she hadn't dared to hope for connection. She rose from the piano bench, her legs trembling slightly, and faced the school board. Her voice, though still shaky, held a newfound strength. "My name is Janelle Rucker," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And this is my story." Later, after the meeting had adjourned and the crowd had dispersed, Principal Lell approached her. He looked older, wearier. The jovial mask he usually wore stripped away, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "Janelle," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Your music, it said everything I couldn't." Janelle met his gaze, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her. Anger, yes, for the careless words that had wounded her so deeply, but also a flicker of understanding, a recognition of the flawed humanity that lay beneath the surface of his well-intentioned but ultimately clumsy attempts at connection. "Music is a language," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Sometimes it speaks louder than words." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I learned that tonight," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I learned a lot tonight." He paused, then added, "I truly am sorry, Janelle, for everything." Janelle didn't reply immediately. The apology, though belated, felt genuine. It wouldn't erase the pain, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had separated them. She looked at him, at the lines etched around his eyes, at the slump of his shoulders, and saw not a caricature of authority but a man grappling with his own failings. "Thank you, Principal Lel," she finally said, a small, hesitant smile gracing her lips. "Music, it can heal." He returned her smile, a fragile, tentative thing. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the unspoken understanding that something had shifted, that a bridge had been built, note by painstaking note. The echo of her music still hung in the air, a testament to the power of vulnerability, the resilience of the human spirit, and the possibility of finding connection in the most unexpected places. The fluorescent lights of Eastgate Middle School hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy that had pulsed through its halls just weeks ago. The echoes of the school board meeting still resonated in the empty corridors, the air thick with the residue of change. Janelle walked those halls now, her footsteps lighter than they'd been since her arrival. The posters announcing the newly established Harmony Project, a school-wide music and arts initiative, were plastered on every available surface. Each colorful flyer, a testament to her unwilling act of defiance, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a strange sensation, this feeling of being both invisible and instrumental. She paused by the music room, her hand hovering over the cool metal of the door handle. Inside, Ms. Green was arranging sheet music, a small smile playing on her lips. Janelle watched her for a moment, the gentle hum of the teacher's movements a comforting rhythm in the otherwise silent hall. The fear that had been a constant companion since her arrival, a tight knot in her stomach, had finally begun to loosen. The memory of Principal Lel's ill-conceived joke, the sting of the laughter, still lingered, but it no longer held the same power. It had been overshadowed by something else, something unexpected, a shared understanding. Pushing the door open, Janelle stepped inside. Ms. Green looked up, her eyes widening slightly before softening into a warm smile. "Janelle," she greeted, her voice melodic. "I was hoping you'd stop by." I just wanted to see," Janelle murmured, her gaze falling to the newly acquired instruments gleaming under the soft light. A brand-new baby grand piano stood proudly in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the room like a dark, inviting pool. She could almost feel the cool ivory under her fingertips, hear the resonant notes echoing in the spacious room. "We have a lot of work to do," Ms. Green said, her voice filled with a quiet excitement. "Building this program from the ground up. It's a daunting task, but I believe it's one worth undertaking." She gestured towards a stack of applications. "We've already received so many sign-ups, from students who never thought they'd have a chance to explore their musical talents." Janelle nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It was hard to reconcile this image of Ms. Green, brimming with enthusiasm, with the reserved woman she had first met. The change in the teacher mirrored the change within herself. The weight of her grief, the constant pressure in her chest, hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer a crushing burden, but a quiet ache, a reminder of what she had lost and what she had found. "We'll need your help, Janelle," Ms. Green continued, her gaze meeting Janelle's. "You sparked this. Your courage, your music, it touched so many people. The word courage felt heavy, ill-fitting. Janelle hadn't felt courageous. She had felt exposed, vulnerable, like a butterfly pinned under a microscope. But seeing the tangible results of her involuntary act of defiance, she understood what Ms. Green meant. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the act of facing it, of letting your voice be heard, even when it trembled. The drive home was quiet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the familiar streets, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Janelle watched the world go by, her mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. The assembly, the principal's insensitive joke, the raw emotion pouring out through her fingertips as she played, the stunned silence that followed, the murmurs, the whispers, the meeting, the apologies, and finally, the change. It was a dizzying kaleidoscope of emotions, a whirlwind that had swept through her life, leaving it irrevocably altered. Stepping into the quiet solitude of her room, Janelle closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the stillness. She walked over to her old, slightly out-of-tune piano, its worn keys a testament to countless hours spent lost in melodies. Sitting down, she gently placed her fingers on the keys, the familiar cool ivory a comfort against her skin. She didn't play. She just sat there, absorbing the quiet, the solitude, the weight of the unspoken words that hung in the air. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock on her bedside table, a steady pulse marking the passage of time. She closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her, a balm to her frayed nerves. The world outside, with its noise and chaos, faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of the house, the gentle rhythm of her own breathing, and the faint, lingering echo of the music that had changed everything. The Harmony Project. The name resonated with her, a hopeful melody in a world often filled with discord. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of ignorance and insensitivity, there was always the possibility of understanding, of connection, of harmony. It was a fragile thing, this nascent understanding, but it was there, a seed planted in the fertile ground of empathy, waiting to blossom. And Janelle, the quiet, introspective girl who had only wanted to be invisible, found herself at the heart of it, a reluctant conductor of change. The music, once her refuge, her solace, had become a bridge, connecting her to a world she had tried so hard to shut out. And in that connection, she found not just healing, but a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was seeking. The silence in her room was no longer empty. It was filled with the promise of music, the whisper of change, and the quiet strength of a girl who had found her voice, not in words, but in the universal language of the heart.